Good morning, everyone. My name is Artemis, Kirk University Librarian, and on behalf of the wonderful Scholarly Communication Committee at Georgetown, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our ongoing series of scholarly communication workshops. Today, it is called Vadis, the Future of Humanities Scholarship. I'm delighted that you're all here. I'm also delighted that we have a live stream with our Doha colleagues at SFSQ. So welcome everyone. I want to thank, first of all, Grace McKinney from the library staff for putting together all of the arrangements, logistics, and refreshments for this symposium. You are very welcome to help yourselves in the ante room to coffee, tea, and delicious goodies. I want also to thank from our Gillard New Media Center, Amy Richards and David Hagan, who are our videographers and photographers today. They are the ones responsible for the live stream with our Doha colleagues. I particularly want to thank the Scholarly Communications Committee, Meg Oakley, our indefatigable chair from the library, Bill Olson, also from the Longer Library, Laura Bishop from the Kennedy Institute of Ethics, Carol Sargent from the Office of Scholarly Communications, Richard Brown, the director of the Georgetown Press, from our law school colleagues, Margaret Krause, from the library again, John Kimbrough, and from SFSQ, Ken Scott, associate director. Welcome to everyone. Today's program is going to be moderated by Professor Daniel Shore, who is associate professor in the English department at Georgetown. He is quite a humanities scholar in his own right. His books include Milton and the Art of Rhetoric, published by Cambridge Press, Cyber Formalism, which explores how searchable digital archives allow us to study the history of linguistic forms. This is a forthcoming book from Johns Hopkins Press. He also is very much involved with the Digital Humanities Project with colleagues at Carnegie Mellon University and 6 Degrees of Francis Bacon. Please join me in welcoming Professor Daniel Shore.
Thank you so much, Artemis. Greetings. It's my pleasure to have a minute or two to introduce our speakers today and to introduce the topic as well. Change is afoot in the way humanities scholars create, publish, distribute, store, organize, and access scholarship. As a scholar of Renaissance literature, as well as a digital humanist, my way of understanding the consequences of the internet and of digital media more generally is to look back to the last big shift in scholarly media, the rise of print in the 15th and 16th centuries. The printing press was, as we all know, a technology invented by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440. But the task of figuring out how to make use of this technology fell largely to 15th and 16th century humanists, who were, in many respects, the ancestors of our present-day humanities. Humanists worked to build an intellectual and social world out of print. Aldus Manutius worked with the artisan Francesco Grifo to develop an italic type font that was compact but legible. He also published libelle portatives, literally portable little books or pocket editions of Greek and Latin texts that are predecessors to our modern-day paperbacks. Poggio Bracciolini and others sought out rare manuscripts by authors such as Cicero, Livy, Vitruvius, and Lucretius, and made them available for publication. Others, like Erasmus of Rotterdam and Conrad Gessner, digested, organized, and assembled classical knowledge into compendia, anthologies, dictionaries, miscellanies, and encyclopedia. Countless others performed the difficult and learned task of translating, editing, and remediating manuscripts to the print age. So even if the parallels between past and present are always imperfect, even if we are hesitant, for example, to see Al Gore as the Johannes Gutenberg of the digital age, there are, as I see it, 3 lessons we might learn from the early stages of print history. The current shift to digital media, like the shift from manuscript to print, is not a pure rupture, a replacement of old. Rather, it is the task of humanities scholars now, as it was of Renaissance humanists centuries ago, to ensure continuity as well as to seek out innovation, to preserve longstanding values like deep thinking, critical attention to sources, and capacious questioning, as well as the texts and traditions that allow us to understand and maintain solidarity with the past. Second, just as rebuilding the world of print, building the world of print required collaboration between humanists and artisans, so too will building a shared digital world require humanists willing to partner with programmers and engineers, technologists and quants, and when possible, to learn the technical skills to do so ourselves. Finally, just as 15th and 16th century humanists were charged with making a history of print media whose full arc they could not have foreseen, so too are we early adopters of digital media, barring the robot apocalypse, charged with figuring out the futures of print media, digital media that will long outlast us and our keenest premonitions. Though they do so under social and technological conditions not of their own choosing, humanities scholars nevertheless make their own history. All the more reason for us to engage now in conversation with and be led by our most distinguished thinkers, conversations about the kind of intellectual and social world we wish to make in the digital age. We are privileged to have with us, to address us today, three enormously distinguished thinkers, and to have them share with us. I will be brief in introducing them since their biographies have been pre-circulated and are on the handouts that were at the front door. First, we'll have introductory remarks offered by Provost Robert Groves, who is the Gerald J. Campbell, S.J., Professor of Math and Statistics in the Math and Statistics Department, as well as the Sociology Department of Georgetown University, where he has served as Executive Vice President and Provost since 2012. We'll then hear from our two panelists, Robert D. Newman, who is the President and Director of the National Humanities Center, and Jane Aikin, who is the Director of the Division of Research Programs at the National Endowment for the Humanities. Please, to start, join me in welcoming Provost Groves.
Thank you so much for your work. Let me first thank the wonderful staff of our great library here at Georgetown for putting this together. This doesn't happen by accident. A lot of work went into it. I thank you, Dan, for leading, for moderating the panel that we'll see. And then for these wonderful two leaders, I thank them. They serve us in the country, and thank them for their service. And I can't wait to hear their thoughts about the future. I love the future orientation of Dan's remarks and the organization of our focus. I want to give you kind of my remarks as a provost who's not a humanist, and how I think and what I think the role of a provost needs to be like. We all know that in the last few years, especially around the Great Recession of 2008-9 and the years that followed, newspapers and blogs and academic journals lamented this. And we heard political officials actually questioning, so why the humanities? Now, those of you in the field recognize those attacks. They're not new attacks. At my level, I find myself defending liberal education in ways that are real, real. The importance of the Humanities Scholarship is a topic that I find myself engaged in. You know, for Georgetown, this has special meaning because of the enormous strength of our humanities faculty at this institution and its role, their role in crafting the image of university. So it's during these periods also, as our speakers know, that in the political discourse, questions about funding of the National Endowment of Humanities and various arts arises. Now, just so I'm a statistical geek, forgive me for a moment, but it is empirically true. This is a note of optimism I run with them. It is empirically true that humanities majors follow the business life. Times are wonderful. The humanities are great. When times are tough, I suspect, I don't have data on this, but I suspect with parents talking to kids and choosing majors, the humanities suffer. So pulling out of the Great Recession, there's good news ahead for the humanities. I appreciate it. So we wrestle with this. I wrestle with this in talking to parents of potential students. And you yourselves, the faculty in this room, and students too, I'm sure have had discussions about a trade-off decision between majoring in, say, philosophy and finance. How does one make those decisions? We know, and we firmly believe, and increasingly we have evidence, that our devotion to the humanities has contributed to the world precisely the kind of young minds that we think the world needs. And these are people who can lead in the creative thought, the critical thinking that's required for innovation. So in a way, it's part and parcel. It's the core of what we do at Georgetown. I was at a conference at Harvard a couple months ago, I guess. It was a wonderful discussion about the need for insights and the way of thinking common to the humanities for a litany of key global challenges. And the speaker, in a way, made a note that I had never really thought of, that although if you read the common literature about what's, the popular literature about what's happening in higher education, it's hard to get through the first paragraph without listening or reading about the challenge of STEM education. But he made the point that although the laboratories and the equipment of scientists seem foreign to the intense thinking and reflection of the humanities, actually the work of the two scholars are precisely the same. They are both sets attempting to glean understanding of phenomena of the world, of how the world works and how people understand the world, finding ambiguity or trying to get rid of ambiguity, trying to find clarity of chaos or in areas of chaos. It was a welcome presentation in that group. And then most recently, there's a report from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences that the result of talking to employers, and that too gives us armament, where the employers say, yeah, I need people that have skills, but frankly, I can teach them those skills. I actually need people who can think. And when they march down the attributes of a good first hire, it matches with the kinds of things we're striving to do here in a wonderful way. So unfortunately, that report isn't mentioned enough in the popular media. And then just recently, we have colleagues who are probing the question of, can we form alliances in the Middle East, new alliances in the Middle East and in India and in Southern Asia. And a fascinating thing has happened. Several of those countries invested large portions of their GDP in building an infrastructure of higher education. If you look at how they invested it, it's disproportionately in STEM education. And so our folks, our colleagues are, kind of talking at the Minister of Education level, and country after country, they say, this isn't paying off for us in the way we thought. We thought that would be the engine of innovation for our society. And so what we've created is a well-trained set of graduates of higher education, but we as leaders of the country aren't seeing the rate of innovation. And they are creating, this is just fascinating to me, they are creating post-baccalaureate programs in the humanities. They have come in, nobody pitched it to them. They have concluded, we made a mistake. And they're trying to patch together a solution. What they really need, and some of them are forward thinking, are building undergraduate programs of liberal education. So, I'm optimistic about this, that, together we might have a better future than we have now. That here on campus, as Dan implied, some of the greatest innovation in thinking about pedagogy, about relevance, about innovation in the humanities is taking place among us. I mentioned the Mellon Foundation program that Catherine Temple is leading that's really probing the edges of pedagogical design, curricular design. And then one other thing that I'm most anxious to see blossom, we constructed a humanities task force, I guess it was late fall. And that was the result of my talking to a lot of people in this room about how could we do better? What are we missing at Georgetown in order to accelerate the value, the appreciation of scholarship, the productivity of scholars? And so the charge to this task force is by the end of this term, believe it or not, this is not going to be a 4-year task force, by the end of this term to give us all a set of options of a way forward for some sort of new institution here that would be a home for all of the humanists on campus and hopefully others, where comfortable, informal, and formal discourse would occur, sharing of work, integration of faculty and students back and forth, the kinds of catalytic interactions that just make us all better. That will then become my work of the coming years, to hit the streets to see if we can find a wonderful Georgetown alumnus who says, by the way, I got to tell you this story. Every time I meet a new Georgetown alumnus, I usually say, so tell me your Georgetown story. And I can tell you, they generally say something about Washington, D.C., but within the first 4 or 5 sentences, they say they reflect back on experiences with our humanities faculty. And this could be, whether they're in the tech sector or the financial sector, it doesn't matter. The life-changing experiences they've had here are because of you. And I'm hoping one of those people, in remembering this, will, by the way, I'm going to need your help on this. So when we find a person who may be interested. So the charge of this committee, let me read it out, is we seek to promote scholarly and artistic endeavors that deepen our collective and competing understandings of human experience. Drawing upon distinguished faculty, students, artists, and a sustained commitment that grows out of our rich Jesuit intellectual tradition, a humanities center at Georgetown would foster a collaborative intellectual environment in which scholars, public intellectuals, and artists grapple with the perplexing concerns and explore the role of the humanities in developing and sustaining innovative inquiry in and outside the academy. So that's what our colleagues are working on. As soon as we get it, we'll distribute it for more ideas. We'll see how it goes. That conversation, like this conversation, I think focuses on the inherent value of the humanities for our society and for the future of the world. And as I said earlier, I'm optimistic that given how the business cycle is going, the near-term future is going to be good. So I trust that you'll hear the same optimism from our national leaders who are sitting in front of you. And I thank them again for taking time out of their schedules to come to this campus and talk to us. And I look forward to their remarks. Thank you very much.
Next, please join me in welcoming Robert D. Newman.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me here. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I particularly want to thank Meg and Grace and Artemis and Dan for putting this together. And it's very heartening to me that your provost is with us today as well. It speaks volumes in terms of the interest on this campus for the humanities. And my understanding is that the topic and the inception of today's conference came from a blog that he wrote as well. So I'm very appreciative of that kind of leadership and that kind of attention. I want to organize my remarks first by preaching to the choir. And as I go around the country in the role that I've taken over since July, it's very important to me, particularly given the sort of adversarial rhetoric that one meets regarding the humanities in this country today, to advocate and to provide some factual information and also some ammunition and elevator speeches to the audiences to which I speak in terms of responding to some of that adversarial rhetoric. I also, of course, want to speak to the topic to some degree, although I think Daniel is much more sophisticated and has done much more cutting-edge research than I on the topic and probably should be a panelist himself. But in terms of the transformative nature of scholarly communication, let's segue quickly to the assessment metrics that we're dealing with as we increasingly are being assessed, and the challenges regarding those assessment metrics as we, to the humanities generally and to the transformative nature of scholarly communication, and then kind of conclude by issuing kind of a clarion call to all of you for thinking about public engagement as part of our scholarship in the future. So, as you may or may not know, prior to taking this position in July at the National Humanities Center, I was the Dean of the Humanities at the University of Utah for a long time. And I did my PhD at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill many years ago. And one of the most fascinating things that I found in my return to the Carolinas after spending 14 years in Salt Lake City, Utah, where in Salt Lake City, the prevailing subtext in almost every conversation, as well as in policy issues and political debates, centered around the Mormon, non-Mormon divide. Returning to Carolina, what's really interesting to me is how even during the tenure of our first African-American president, the prevailing subtext still centers around race. And granted, it's an issue that pervades much of our country, but many of the seeds for the issue remain grounded in the South and, of course, played out in a lot of the reactionary rhetoric that's too often heard in Washington, D.C. As we talk about and see steady progress toward a new South that's a microcosm of the country's shifts in so many key directions, exploring honestly and in depth the reasons behind divides, and then engaging in civil discourse and study to bridge them, remain the critical challenges and the primary obstacles toward our true progress as a democratic and civil society. Interrogating and bridging, I think, are the core methodologies in humanities research and teaching. Thus, I would argue a humanities perspective is essential to our understanding and our success personally and collectively as citizens, to the success of our mission as educators, and to our ability to address the intractable problems from climate change to immigration to national security to inequality to the proper exercise of critical judgment that face us and require pluralistic analysis, recommendations, and implementation in order to be overcome. But before discussing further the necessity of a humanities perspective to ensure success and why public engagement is critical to that success, and how we might incorporate the shifting terrain of scholarly communication in our assessment practices, I want to first return to bridging religious divides. There's a story, an old story, about the Pope and the chief rabbi of Italy. And several centuries ago, the Pope decreed that all the Jews had to leave Italy. And there was, of course, a huge outcry in the Jewish community, so the Pope offered a deal. He would have a religious debate with a leader of the Jewish community. And if the Jewish leader won the debate, the Jews would be permitted to stay in Italy. And if the Pope won, the Jews would have to leave. So the Jewish community met and they picked an aged rabbi, Moshe, to represent them in the debate. And Rabbi Moshe, however, could not speak Latin. And the Pope could not speak Yiddish. So it was decided that they would have a silent debate. And on the day of the great debate, the Pope and Rabbi Moshe sat opposite each other for a full minute before the Pope raised his hand and showed 3 fingers. And Rabbi Moshe looked back and he raised 1 finger. And next the Pope waved his finger around his head and Rabbi Moshe pointed to the ground where he sat. And then the Pope brought out a communion wafer and a chalice of wine, and Rabbi Moshe pulled out an apple. And with that, the Pope stood up and he said, "I concede the debate. This man has bested me, the Jews can stay." So later the cardinals gathered around the Pope and they asked him what had happened. And the Pope said, "Well, first I held up 3 fingers to represent the Trinity, and he responded by holding up 1 finger to remind me that there is still one God common to both our religions. And then I waved my finger around to show him that God was all around us, and he responded by pointing to the ground to show that God was right here with us. And then I pulled out the wine and the wafer to show that God absolves us of our sins. And he pulled out an apple to remind me of original sin. He had an answer for everything, and what could I do?" Meanwhile, the Jewish community crowded around Rabbi Moshe and they asked what had happened. "Well," said Rabbi Moshe, "first he said to me, 'You Jews, you have 3 days to get out of here.' So I said to him, 'Not one of us is going to leave.' And then he tells me that the whole city around would be cleared of the Jews. So I said to him, 'Listen here, Mr. Pope, the Jews, we stay right here.' And then asked a woman what happened, and Rabbi Moshe said, 'Who knows, we broke for lunch.'" Now, our political and religious and academic debates are seldom silent, and we typically perpetuate, and they're typically perpetuated rather than solved through misunderstanding. And unlike many of our current presidential candidates, we look to authenticity, to enduring truths to help to salvage reason and sense in the jumbled mixed messages that we receive steadily. When I listen to some of the recent debates, I'm reminded of the great Hollywood producer Samuel Goldwyn, and Samuel Goldwyn offered this advice to aspiring actresses. "The most important thing about acting is sincerity. If you can fake that, you've got it made." So the mission of the humanities, I think, is to expose rather than to create shams, to root out the sources of and to rectify bogus claims and unsubstantiated assertions. We are all about storytelling, but storytelling is revelation of truth and understanding, not for reckless self-promotion. Against all the adversarial rhetoric about the irrelevance of the humanities that pervades policy and sound bites from politicians to concerns of parents about the economic well-being of their liberal arts major children, I want to argue that never have the humanities been more crucial to our sustainability as citizens in a civil society, to the future success of our children and grandchildren, and to discovering and remembering what's most profound and what's most important in our lives. The mission of the humanities embraces the essence of democracy, and it's a precious underpinning of our American heritage, freedom of thought. It's a mission that should be promoted and respected, no more in extravagance than nourishing food, clean air, good health care, as sustenance and ministry for quality of life. I believe that the humanities are at the core of a successful education, a successful life, and a successful civilization. They help us to address crucial issues facing us as a people. Absent a humanities perspective, solutions to environmental degradation, climate change, immigration, water rights and resources, food consumption, geopolitical cataclysms, and the implementation of new technologies remain incomplete. Technology cannot assess the multiple masks of evil, the complicated ethics of choice, the pain of loss, the joys of love, the frustrations and celebrations of our yearning to be both human and more than human produce. Technology is premised on answering the hows and the whats, quite important, but not the whys. Only in the humanities do we continue to have that conversation despite its often exasperating indeterminacy. The humanities are essential to learning and to life as they've always been, but their success is less easy to measure than that of the other disciplines. And this is a primary reason why their societal impact often has been misinterpreted. The production and dissemination of knowledge cannot be counted like the number of widgets on an assembly line. How do we measure how a thesis that's formulated in an article on literature finds its way into discussions about how we approach historical events that over the course of several years dynamically change the discipline or transform how teachers construct a syllabus? Yet articles about 19th century slave narratives in women's domestic journals did just that. Or how a passage gleaned from a publication written by a fellow at the National Humanities Center influences a classroom presentation by a Georgetown professor who's read that publication. And that in turn, in my classroom presentation and discussion, catches the imagination of an undergraduate student who goes on to apply it to an invention that she's working on, or to a repurposing of her life. Contemporary humanities education has become multifaceted in its complications, a feature of its continuous unfolding, but it's also a challenge to its sustainability. The headlong rush of state legislatures and both public and private universities into support of STEM programs at the expense of, rather than as complementary to, humanities programs masks the fact that majors in both the physical sciences and mathematics have diminished more rapidly than those in the humanities. That 52% of those who graduate in STEM fields are not working in these fields after 10 years, but do not possess the foundational skills that are necessary for adaptability in a changing workforce. These skills are, of course, taught in the humanities. But many institutions of higher learning have seized on this one-dimensional trajectory. Georgetown, fortunately, is not. The logical outcome of this trajectory is that these schools become little more than vo-tech schools with football teams. We in the humanities still are committed to breadth of learning and a respect for the pursuit of knowledge for knowledge's sake. This is akin to the frontier spirit that propelled us as a nation, the consecration of discovery as a foundational and as a sacred principle of who we are and why we're here. We see this diminution of the humanities in former Senator Rick Santorum's remarks that the liberal arts are a road to nowhere. In Governor Rick Scott's proposal that the Florida public universities enact higher tuition just for liberal arts majors. In Governor Scott Walker's advocacy that the mission statement for the University of Wisconsin have the phrase, basic to every purpose of the system is the search for truth, removed, and the statement simplified to meets the state's workforce needs. In Senator Marco Rubio's call for fewer philosophers and more welders, and in President Obama's joking derision of art history majors. To those who argue the humanities cannot cure cancer, cannot win a war against terrorists, or cannot increase your paycheck and therefore should take a back seat to those enterprises that can, I want to offer the following. Without the ability of a physician to listen carefully to and engage with a patient's narrative, in other words, to take a good case history, early detection and prevention of many cancers do not occur. And for those who must endure cancer treatment or make critical decisions regarding how they live and sometimes how they die, the humanities touchstones matter as much as chemical interventions. As for the war on terror, perhaps an in-depth study of history by those who occupied the White House in 2003 might have prevented us from fighting ISIS today. Kenneth Burke wrote of literature as providing equipment for living. And indeed, humanities skills offer a multifaceted and adaptable toolbox for navigating career shifts and changing workforce demands. And it's a statistical fact that liberal arts majors earn more during the course of their lifetimes than business majors. Too often, we have seen the misguided and adversarial rhetoric about the humanities shaping public understanding when we, who are the rhetoricians, should be articulating and disseminating the contours of this understanding. Frederick Jameson told us we must always historicize. Economists, corporate, and hospital CEOs tell us we must always monetize. Evangelicals preach that we must always proselytize. Perhaps it's important that we remember to always humanize. We're at a cultural and historical juncture in which the humanities must figure into any discussion about addressing major challenges which face us as species. Mark Danner has called us empiricists of the word, scientists of the spirit. Our investigations and revelations concern the most crucial elements of human experience: love and loss, beauty and truth, right and wrong, tragedy and comedy, joy and despair, meaning and emptiness. Whether we reflect on our personal or on our national history, it's the humanities moments that are most resonant and most epiphanic, to which we continually return to mark who we are as individuals and as a culture and why. Given the adversarial rhetoric about the humanities, what we have not done as well as we might, especially since, as I said, humanities scholars are those who are trained in rhetoric, is to adequately defend ourselves. We often take reactive positions instead of setting the stage for the debate. We often adopt the methodologies and the terminology of other disciplines we perceive as being in favor, rather than assert creatively our own skills as interrogators and as wordsmiths. And most alarmingly, we've not done the job of connecting with broader constituencies, of translating our work and our mission so they make sense and resonate with the general public, of demonstrating our fundamental place in helping to make the personal and the collective more fulfilling intellectually, spiritually, economically, culturally, and politically. We need to better communicate our history lessons and show how the philosophical underpinnings of our Constitution and Declaration of Independence, the ramifications of which influence our daily and long-term security and capacity as citizens, how they are seeded by the humanities and find their expression in the humanities moments that pervade our lives. NEH's new initiative, about which I'm sure Jane will refer, the common good, the humanities in the public square, speaks to the need for inclusion of the humanities to address the grand challenges that define this moment in American and indeed global history. The initiative states, for the truly important questions that we face are not essentially technical questions. Rather, they are questions that appear at the intersections of our culture, our history, our values, and ideas. NSF increasingly requests proposals that are broadly interdisciplinary, inclusive of a humanities perspective. And our major foundations throughout the country and globally are increasingly focusing more and more on the grand challenges and questions that require multiple perspectives and deeply contextualized solutions. Yet a perceptual dichotomy and hierarchy between and in what we call pure research and public humanities still persists in university hiring, salary and research awards, and in tenure and promotion practices. The job market is increasingly constrained, yet chairs of dissertation committees continue to try to replicate themselves via their graduate students, while the prospects for such replication are at best diminished and at worst nil. And the digital advances enabling broad and creative dissemination of scholarship, pedagogy, and intellectual conversations that resonate in the public sphere are only now creeping into the realm of what is deemed marginally acceptable in the holy sanctuary of distinguished work. For all the accusations that they are the bastions of neo-Marxist corruption, universities remain among the most conservative institutions in our society. Assessment of quality and success persists as an increasingly contentious yet ubiquitous aspect of academic life. While some form of external critique or peer review is inherent to virtually every field of humanistic inquiry, increasing demands by accreditation boards, trustees, funding organizations, legislatures, and government agencies for stronger and more quantitative reporting of outcomes have produced much consternation. The humanities indicators that are published by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences have provided a lot of useful information, but the extent and manner of their implementation are not yet clear. They give us a lot of information about the what, but little about the why, and don't necessarily offer a compelling case for why we should care. The firm Academic Analytics has become the go-to source for assessment of institutional and individual faculty rankings that largely determine admission into the AAU, as well as Provostian assessments for resource allocation. Yet its understanding of humanities impacts often lags behind and is configured by the paradigms of the sciences. Furthermore, the means for assessing digital and collaborative research often are vexed, or at least lacking continuity in most institutional contexts. Also, the advanced research that typically supports ambitious projects in public humanities is sometimes in tension with these projects in terms of audience and impact. Finally, the changing landscape of scholarly communication have contributed to a sense that assessment metrics and methodologies need serious rethinking. I want to offer 6 questions that might be considered in this discussion about these assessment metrics as we are moving into an era and have moved into an era of transformation in scholarly communication. The first is, what kind of time frame actually offers an accurate assessment of impact? And it's very different, I think, for the humanities than perhaps for engineering. The second is, how do we blend qualitative and quantitative assessments usefully and creatively? The third is, how do we best assess digital, public, and collaborative humanities projects? The fourth is, how do we effectively assess emerging alternative publication venues like web-based publication and open source? The fifth is, how might public humanities be integrated with programs of pure research? And the sixth is, what is the value of liberal arts to contemporary university education? And how do we measure its long-term success in life? Digital humanities and open access have created path-breaking opportunities for collaboration, for dissemination, and for reshaping presentation and influence. While the science community has generally quickly accepted open access, seeing it as a means to disseminate its work more expeditiously, especially regarding crucial and immediate concerns, humanities has often lagged behind, perpetuating the two cultures dichotomy. Much of the resistance to open access in the humanities has stemmed from a reliance on traditional ideas of peer review. Although many forget that double-blind peer review emerged largely in the 50s, rather recently, relatively speaking, and somehow scholarship survived without a prior. This gatekeeper method has not been without its issues, most significantly a perpetuation of sameness in the name of standards. Open access peer review extends the number of commentators, potentially opening the work under consideration up to fresh considerations from multiple viewpoints while launching a more extended and participatory conversation that still might yield to some circumscribed hierarchy of decision makers, but potentially gets ideas into the broader audience quickly, a significant consideration when we're dealing with crucial grand challenges in contemporary life. Martin Eve and Kathleen Fitzpatrick have studied this question and posed intriguing alternatives in their books. Publishers are beginning experimental forays into alternative processes. For example, University of California Press has Luminous, an open source experiment for book publication, which is causing many publishers to rethink the traditional means of monograph review and dissemination. Such a model offers the potential, as the press states, to exponentially increase the visibility and impact of scholarly work by making it globally acceptable and freely available in digital formats. Costs are recovered upfront through subventions, breaking down barriers of access at the other end, for libraries and for individual readers anywhere in the world. Open access provides the framework for preserving and reinvigorating monograph publishing for the future through sharing costs between all parties who benefit from publication, author or institution, publisher, and libraries. In this model, no one entity carries the whole burden, making it sustainable for the long haul. The selection and review processes remain the same as in a traditional program. The same exacting criteria and peer review standards apply. Now, while one might cite the economic concerns about the fragility of university press budgets and the resultant limited runs of scholarly books, it seems that the intensified competition for acceptance of manuscripts and the intensified competition for acceptance of manuscripts and the pressures on tenure and promotion considerations, early evidence around this experiment indicates that there's been a 20% elevation in sales of university press books that are first offered through open access. Just as digital humanities projects and web-based publication are forcing universities to rethink tenure and promotion requirements, alternative publication venues like open source will continue to compel us to stretch our imaginations and our bureaucracies to accommodate changes that come naturally both to a technologically enhanced culture and to an intellectually vibrant and interdisciplinary scholarly community. Further, the elitist disdain for work that engages the public domain must take a back seat to the necessity in rhetorically, ethically, and for the sake of survival to translate the impact of our inquiries both within esoteric communities of experts as well as within the profound intersections where broad ideas touch everyday pleasures and struggles in the general public. So in conclusion, I don't agree that the role of the public intellectual is one that should be marginalized or denigrated in the academy. We are a culture of rigor and pluralism and innovation and of evidence. As long as these values are maintained in our processes and our products, the shape our work takes, the audience it reaches, and the valuation it receives benefits from a healthy multiplicity and a resistance to static definitions and one-dimensional accountability. We have always been creative in our means of expression and currently are facing an insidious erosion of our raison d'etre that feeds into and is fed by the decline of a civil society with an informed and thoughtful public. Our scholarly mission includes knowledge production and dissemination, not only for the benefit of an esoteric scholarly community, but for the common good. Thank you.
Great. Next up, please join me in welcoming Jane Aikin.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here. I have been inspired and impressed by my colleagues' presentations here. I think I'm going to bring us down to a little more practical level. I'm at an agency where I handle the receipt and processing of approximately 2,900 grant applications per year. That agency is the National Endowment for the Humanities, a federal agency that Congress founded back in 1965. We are 50 years old this year. Through the years, endowment programs, as you probably know, have supported humanities research, education, public programs, challenge grants for institutions, the digital humanities, and the state humanities councils. We get about 5,000 applications a year. I said we get from the research division 2,900 of those applications. That's almost 60%. So I see a lot of applications. I read a lot of applications. I read applications all the time, everywhere. Now, up front, I want to say, and I think this is really important for all of you to hear, that the applications I see in the Division of Research Programs provide the very best testimony I know to the good intellectual health of the humanities. I think you should be congratulating yourselves, all of you, that you're doing such good work. I read so many applications, and I just want to talk a little bit about our recent experience and about some new experience with scholarship and with the programs that we have looked at, thought about a lot during the last 2 years, and now we're revising somewhat and adding to. Okay, let's start with fellowships. When somebody says, I got an NEH, it's generally understood to mean an NEH fellowship. Traditionally, of course, scholars have communicated with their colleagues by publishing in print. The NEH Fellowships Program is one of the first grant programs NEH offered, and through the years, it has taken by far the greatest number of applications in comparison, as I've said, with other NEH programs. Our bookshelves at the endowment harbor over 7,000 volumes that testify to the good health and vigor of the humanities. In general, these have not been projects designed for other than a scholarly audience. The criteria for evaluating fellowship application give preference to projects on significant humanities subjects that are well designed and well executed by well qualified scholars to advance scholarship in their fields. And so they have, and they continue to do. Most recently, for example, and you're going to hear a lot of examples because I think they're interesting. Most recently, the program funded an investigation of journalistic objectivity in African American and mainstream press's coverage of the civil rights movement, a history of the relationship between religion and business in 16th and 17th century Dutch colonies, and an investigation of the archaeological record to learn more about how and why ancient civilizations deliberately destroyed some of their own texts. All fellowships projects expect and are expected to provide new knowledge, and applications can address subjects related to any time period and any place. Historically, the fellowships programs also have provided an avenue of upward mobility for scholars who want to turn their dissertations into books or want to advance their careers by publishing a second or a third or whatever monograph. We heard from many scholars and continue to hear that these opportunities don't just advance disciplines, they also advance people. And we're fully aware of that. Fellowships buy people the time to think. That's what that's about. Sometimes our fellowship and summer stipend winners have produced books that appeal to a broader audience. This is not, as I've said, required of them. An excellent application titled New Foundations for Comparative Logic has just received a summer stipend award in company with a similarly excellent proposal that, at least for some of us, dwells on the much more approachable subject of illustration in 19th century American literary publications. The flip side is that when our peer review panelists encounter fellowships criteria that call for both rigorous thinking and rigorous research, they have sometimes discounted public appeal. While applications to write books intended for a wider audience are eligible and have historically been eligible in the fellowships program, they face the challenge of condensing panels of their simultaneous scholarly and public appeal. And yet, having gone through a long period during which much academic writing turned theory-driven and often became completely opaque except to experts, we're now seeing changes. There has appeared a sense that while scholars could and should speak to colleagues, they can also consider reaching out to the public. Some academics, no doubt, have always appealed more broadly. but we've seen increased encouragement in the last decade, fostered, I think, partly by public radio and television and other media. NEH's principal role here has been to provide support for public programs, especially documentaries, and perhaps most especially those produced by Ken Burns, who's practically a household word. Thus, a couple of years ago, we started to think about the idea of a grant program for producing books written by scholars, relying on both primary and secondary sources, but in a style that could appeal to a general audience. Around the same time, NEH acquired a new chairman, Dr. William D. Adams, nicknamed Bro, who from the beginning, he pressed his staff to design new programs that would make the humanities far more appealing for a wider audience. He proposed an initiative called the Common Good. With that initiative, he aims at the broadest possible engagement of the American public with the humanities. Common Good projects are intended to demonstrate the relevance of the humanities to our times, our values, beliefs, ideas, assumptions, our histories, and our cultures. Every new program NEH has developed under this initiative over the past 18 months has been aimed at some way at a broader public. So Bro Adams was from the outset a strong advocate of what is now the Public Scholar Program, and he folded it into his Common Good initiative. The Research Division introduced the Public Scholar Program in 2015. It looked, and it still looks, like the NEH Fellowship Program because it has a flexible 4 to 12-month tenure period at $4,200 a month. When we put out the publicity for this new program, as with all new programs, we didn't have a clue what to expect. In fact, before deadline day, I think I dreamed every night of the Miracle on 34th Street scene in which the post office brings all those tubs of letters to Santa Claus. And I saw similar tubs marching in my door. But we didn't know. Will we get a dozen? We get a few dozen applications? Or will we get hundreds? We got hundreds. We did get hundreds. And we got many of them from people who had never applied to NEH before. So I think we learned a lesson right there. In the Public Scholar Program, we expect applicants to bring us their ideas for books on nonfiction topics that will appeal to a public audience or a particular kind of audience, even a niche audience. A good example of such an audience is for books on the Civil War. There are thousands of books on the war, but we never seem to run short of interest in more and more of them. To go further in describing what we thought might be interesting, the guidelines suggest that scholarship for a public audience might present a narrative, tell the stories of important individuals, analyze significant texts, synthesize ideas, provide interest in a neglected subject, or examine the latest thinking on a topic. We saw all of the above in the end from that first round of applications. And from that series of applications, we funded 36 projects. The winners are now at work on their books. Some of them are faculty members at colleges and universities. We also have a significant group of independent scholars, especially writers and journalists. We have a really varied list of winners. Let me tell you about some of them. For military history buffs, we have John McManus's History of the U.S. Army in the World War II Pacific and Asian Theaters, Phillips O'Brien's biography of Admiral William Leahy, and Christopher Hager's study of Civil War letters. For those who like the art scene, there is Aaron Cohen's project on Chicago music, soul music of the 60s and 70s, and Kembrew MacLeod's work on the New York arts world at the same time. Noah Eisenberg's Everybody Comes to Rick's, How Casablanca Taught Us to Love Movies, is an obvious candidate for a popular audience. Another one that's going to draw a lot of readers, I think, is Greg Heckimovich's book about solving the mystery of Hannah Crafts, a fugitive slave who wrote the mid-19th century novel that Henry Louis Gates discovered and published in 2002. Gates never identified Hannah Crafts' identity, but Heckimovich has found it. For readers fond of adventure and science, we have Sarah Dry's Water World, How the Sciences of Water Went Global. We could hardly believe, no pun intended, for that one. And Christina Thompson's How the Island of Polynesia Were Settled and How We Knew. Finally, very much in tune with the common good, we have Jennifer Tucker's History of Photographic Detection and Surveillance, certain to resound with current concerns about privacy. It will be an interesting companion to the recent Summer Stipend Award, I want to acknowledge, to Georgetown's own Brian Hoekman, his proposal was for history of wiretapping. All these awardees, as I said, are currently at work. So for most of them, it won't be time to expect results for a while. Many, but not all of them, are publishing with commercial presses, and some are promised very large print runs. Our first product from the program to be published soon is Judith Dupre's Architectural and Cultural History of One World Trade Center, which will be accompanied by an interactive website. It will be published by Little Brown late this month. We were curious about the first group of public scholars because we've had no experience with this kind of project. So we had our communications staff do some interviews with them. The interviews you'll find on the NH website. But here's a sample. It is Judith Dupre's answer to one of our questions. We asked her, what is the biggest challenge of writing a scholarly book for a general audience? And she said, narratives written for the general public must be accessible and presume the reader has an interest in a topic, but little, if any, specialized knowledge. And then she said, it requires humility. You must write to communicate and impress. And it also requires making artful choices that will spark the reader's imagination. Writing about architecture, she finds, a highly visual and physical art, compounds the difficulty of explaining in words what is best experienced in person. Photographs can approximate that experience and help transport the reader from a textual to a contextual understanding. They cannot replace presence itself. I hope you'll look out for Judith's book when it appears. She is the author of the previous book on skyscrapers. As you consider the two kinds of programs, the regular fellowships program and the public scholar program, it's important to notice that there are big differences between them. In the first round of public scholar applications, we got proposals that would have fared much better in fellowships. It takes a different kind of proposal and it relies on a different kind of critique when we look at public scholar competitions. That is why for the public scholar competition, the guidelines require, which we don't in fellowships, a writing sample of 20 pages so our evaluators can consider how well and able an applicant is to write in an interesting and well-informed way for the public. But we aren't done yet. Just after we announced the public scholar winners last summer, we started to think other thoughts about how scholars reach different audiences. So we went back to the drawing board and tried to develop another funding proposal of our own. So far, the endowment has funded mostly scholars' books and their participation in public programs. But the success of NEH's Office of Digital Humanities in attracting institutional applications for large electronic projects suggested a different kind of communication, both scholarly and not. Again, with Chairman Adams' encouragement, we developed that proposal for the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Mellon approved the idea early this year. We are calling this new program the NEH Mellon Fellowships for Digital Publication. Here we are departing completely from print publication. Yes, the program is for individual scholars producing research projects. But for this NEH Mellon Award, an applicant will request funding for a project that cannot be accomplished with traditional print format. The requirements for excellence in research methodology and design remain. But for this program, digital publication must be essential to the applicant's research goals. We say in the description that successful projects will likely incorporate visual, audio, and or other multimedia materials or flexible reading pathways that could not be included in traditionally published books. We are not looking here for just ebooks, which we now get in the regular fellowships program. But we now get them as one mode of publication for the print product, usually a companion. Now, this competition requires quite a different kind of application and product than those that are produced in fellowships. We are planning to advertise this opportunity for 3 years, at the end of which we will evaluate the results in consultation with Mellon. One project that just received a Summer Stipends Award provides an example. Michael Gallup's application for a multimedia electronic project that centers on mid-20th century avant-garde musical scores and adds multiple pathways that interrelate animation, audio, video, photographs, correspondence, and analysis. The musicologists who evaluated the application spoke approvingly of the project's potential to reach scholars and students with a comprehensive tool that would make clearer and more understandable varieties of music that they have found difficult, that they have found difficult to visualize and teach. So let me go a little bit further into this application. It focuses on the 1950s and 1960s. And he is going to have an account of composers, writers, and visual artists' innovative conceptions of what counted as musical material. Abandoning the traditional music staff for charts, diagrams, and written instructions. Some created, he says, scores whose graphic artistry was an end in itself, independent of any realization or performance. He will work with 2 collaborators on what he calls an electronic book containing ephemeral documents, images, films, and recordings, uniting audio and visual performances with text. His audience, Gallup explains, will be able to view a complex score, for example, by John Cage, and hear it performed as the notation changes from black to red and sync with the audio playback. Accompanying the animated score will be filmed and photographed performances, concert reviews, and unpublished material such as performers' notes. Each of 14 scores will have a critical introduction, uniting musicological, literary, and artistic commentaries on the qualities of the score, illuminating details and quirks, and allowing playback to decode the symbolic system at work. Gallup and his collaborators intend to work to unite separate disciplinary conversations to avoid privileging a single approach to appreciation of the scores. The deadline for the NEH Mellon Digital Humanities Fellowships Program is the same as the regular fellowships program, which this year is April 28th. Again, we are in the position of not knowing how many applications we'll receive and what kind of projects we'll find in this batch. It will surely be interesting, even wildly interesting. I don't look forward to repeating my nightmares about how many projects we're going to see coming in, and which is an irrelevant nightmare, actually. I'm rather embarrassed by it because, of course, we receive everything electronically these days. While NEH, of course, is not the only funding source for humanities programs, we do enjoy following trends in humanities scholarship as they appear in fellowship applications. A dozen years ago, for example, I recall the number of Latin American studies applications was too few to justify a single freestanding fellowships panel. For several years now, though, we've had 2 panels in both the fellowships and summer stipends programs. Similar increases have occurred in religious studies and in history and philosophy of science. I'm sure it's no news as well that transnational history, comparative studies, global studies, and imperial and regional studies attract increasing scholarly attention. But there also continue to be attractive applications, and I must say this, that address traditional subjects, themes, and methods. The recent grants lists include projects that break new intellectual ground, projects that synthesize earlier scholarship, and projects to add to the tools of scholarship by producing translations or editions. We see the full range of what people are producing. I hope that the new programs and research that I described will attract a wide variety of people and applications. And we're offering them, of course, along with our traditional programs, to try to fit the endowment's agenda to both existing endeavors and emerging departures of scholarship and the communication of scholarship. In a funding agency such as NEH, we talk to ourselves a lot about the challenges of thinking about where the field is going and the idea of leading the field versus following the field. I think most of us have come to some peace with that. We don't really lead the field. We watch what you're doing. We think about what you're doing. And we try to formulate programs that are going to address the most promising directions of what we see. For that reason, of course, NEH doesn't bar any subject, any time period, anything like that. We're happy to receive applications for anything across the board. But there are a couple of programs. Do I have any more time? Yeah, maybe I have a little more time, right? I think maybe I should go now to collaborative research, because collaborative research is a matter of much current interest. And it is a program that we've had for quite some time. We don't make a lot of awards in this program. If you watch the award list, there are not a lot of awards. We frankly haven't received enough excellent applications in collaborative research to make awards happen. But I think if we keep going out and talking to folks who are doing some collaboration and they keep coming in and talking to us, we'll find some projects that we will want to go along with. Collaborative research grants, the program supports original research undertaken by a team of 2 or more scholars. The awards are from 1 to 3 years and provide up to $100,000 a year. The annual deadline for proposals is early in December, this year on December 9th. So I want to go to an example that actually does fit the common good, but was actually funded a couple of years ago. The project's title is an international collaboration on the political, social, and cultural history of the emergence of HIV/AIDS. The multinational project team includes an anthropologist, an environmental history of great ape hunting, an urban historian of the Congo, a virologist, a scholar of sexuality in Central Africa, a medical anthropologist of Portuguese Africa, and 2 historians of disease and Western medicine in Africa. The collaborators are exploring interactive developments that influence the transformation of simian immunodeficiency viruses into human ones. They are assessing historical epidemiology during the colonial and post-colonial periods, investigating the socioeconomic and political processes and medical procedures incident to viral adaptation and epidemic spread. The areas involved are Cameroon, the Central African Republic, Kinshasa, and Brazzaville, and several other sites in West Africa. As the list of scholars suggests, topics of investigation are great ape and monkey hunting, urbanization, prostitution, human mobility, the separate emergence of HIV-2 in Portuguese Africa, mass injection campaigns, and blood transfusions. The participants are consulting government and unofficial sources in Portugal, France, and Africa, and doing oral history interviews in Africa. The team will hold a series of group meetings with additional scientists brought in as advisors. The goal of the project is not only to provide a new understanding of how HIV/AIDS spread, but how the transmission was shaped by social forces. The project outcome will be a multi-authored book that discusses the larger historical, political, economic, social, and cultural relations that shape the emergence of disease. Note the emphasis here on archival sources and oral histories. The plan of work clearly concentrates on humanities documentation. I can almost intuit a question here, so let me go on and say that NEH would not rule out contributing to the humanities portion of a project that also enlisted scientific method. On occasion, applicants have submitted separate applications to NSF and NEH and have the prospect for receiving funding for both, provided the expenditures do not overlap and a convincing rationale is provided for each part of the project. People in the collaborative research team are happy to work with folks on formulating applications. This does not happen in fellowships because we simply get too many applications for the number of staff we have. In collaborative, you can ask a staff member to read a draft. They will take a look before evaluation. So in closing, I want to say especially thank you very much to all of you who have served as panelists for the endowment. We depend heavily on your expertise to guide our evaluation process, our peer review process. Decisions are difficult, our resources are limited, but I still urge everyone to apply. Writing an application is, of course, a challenging exercise in expressing ideas in a very restricted space. And funded or not, you can write to staff or ask for panelists' comments on your application. Evaluators' comments have led some applicants to open new lines of inquiry or to revise their projects, resubmit them, and eventually receive awards. I also urge you to look at program guidelines on the ANH website well ahead of every deadline, and call or email the ANH staff if you have questions. The staff especially enjoys talking to prospective applicants about your ideas, and we try hard to provide the best advice on submitting and formulating and submitting an application. Thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, I'm going to open up questions to the audience in just a moment, but as part of my role, my privilege as moderator, I have the chance to frame a question or two myself. First, let me say I enjoyed hearing so much about how these different papers talk to each other. It struck me that Provost Groves was thinking about how the humanities can be defended and championed within the institution, specifically Georgetown. And Robert Newman, you were addressing about how the humanities especially can seek to defend themselves, can adopt the rhetoric, the right way of defending itself and proving its value in the larger public sphere. In formulating a question, I thought first that you had sort of formulated all the questions for me already in those 6 questions, which is very helpful, and I'm sure will be true when audience members ask. But then Jane, it struck me that your presentation in some ways offered really compelling answers to many of those questions, questions about how we can support and encourage public engagement, digital scholarship, and thinking about collaboration as well. The example you gave of Michael Gallup and his avant-garde music scores seemed to me a perfect example of the way that humanists are doing the work of rethinking the possibilities of what humanities scholarship can do and what humanities publication can do. And I hope you'll forgive me for disagreeing with you when you said that the NEH does not lead in some way. It strikes me that in some ways the NEH's public engagement is ahead of institutional metrics in valuing and supporting public humanities scholarship, right? That you don't get tenure, you don't get advancement at most institutions by writing a trade book, a book that aims to speak to a wider audience, but you might get a year of NEH research, and that's a big deal, and that strikes me as one of the ways that norms change. So I wanted to put the question to both of you about this mismatch between the metrics and forms of assessment, of which fellowship funding is one, that value field-specific research, and then all the various other kinds of ways that we can speak to a wider public, and how it is we might think outside of, including, but in addition to fellowship funding, how we might bring those two things into alignment.
Thank you. Well, as I mentioned, I think this is a really vexing and vexed issue currently. I would agree that NEH is providing a lot of leadership in terms of, particularly with the common goods, directing a lot of resources and attention to engaging the public more. I don't think, coming from my experience as a dean and trying to carefully, delicately, and incrementally sort of stretch the parameters a little bit about how we count things so that we can address the needs to get our scholars more out in the public and to engage the public. Obviously, those kinds of things met with some degree of resistance and some degree of acclamation. But it also, it occurred to me it kind of resonates with whenever changes are made within a particular university setting. So the advent of interdisciplinarity, of course, over the past 3 or 4 decades has not always gone easily. Yet I think most of us really accepted it, and most of our younger professors at least have been trained in those avenues. But interdisciplinarity was typically seen often as a kind of threat from the outside. It's as if you have an ecosystem and it's nicely contained, and suddenly you have the species threat from the outside, and the ecosystem throws up all these barriers of protection. And often what happens in a long conversation and trying out various experiments, which will require institutional support and leadership, plus some kind of zealousness from individuals to sort of move these things forward. We try different experiments, and some go well, and some don't go well. Now, it strikes me this also speaks to the idea of a more risk-averse culture that we're all involved with right now, particularly in the university settings. And that's somewhat problematic for experimentation in the humanities and how we measure things and what kind of assessment mechanisms we're going to sort of bring to bear within a risk-averse environment, and how to think more flexibly about budgetary constraints, which are often the reason why those barriers were thrown up initially to interdisciplinarity, because of the way things were articulated in terms of budgets initially. But just as a brief example, Jane mentioned Greg Kekimovich, for example, and his work. Henry Louis Gates found this Hannah Croft narrative, and who was Hannah Croft? And Greg is actually at the National Humanities Center this year writing the book about who was Hannah Croft, and he's done all this wonderful detective work. And it's an interesting sort of both public humanities project as well as a very intensely traditional scholarly project simultaneously. And the book is a very, very scholarly book. But it struck me that, let's get this out into the public. So and usually at the National Humanities Center, what we try to do with the fellows who are in residence there is completely protect their time. They are there, they're not supposed to be distracted whatsoever. However, we do have a public lecture series, and we have an increasingly wide audience of people from the Research Triangle area that come to those public lectures, and it's different than talking to a solely academic audience. And I asked Craig to give this public lecture, which was very successful. We had about 150 people show up. The demographics were a little bit different than we traditionally had experienced, which was great as well. But that got out, and then we podcasted the whole thing. And then we pushed everything out through social media as well. So the idea of sort of translating the intensely scholarly work into a broader sphere is incumbent upon, I think, all of us. And somehow we need to reform to some degree and have conversations at least about reforming the entire apparatus of assessment, both in terms of assessment of individuals as opposed to in addition to assessment of institutions as a whole, to encapsulate the fact that we need to be reaching out to the public. That's a rather long-winded response.
Well, you're the one that introduced the term metrics, which is a term I wouldn't have introduced. If you know something about the National Endowment for the Humanities, you know that it is part of the federal government and is part of the executive branch of the federal government. That means that the office of chairman is someone who is appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Most presidents want to name their own chairman. So we get a new chairman every 4 years or every 8 years. And what we do, where we put a lot of accent, is on what the chairman would like to do. When Bro Adams came in, he said, I want to enlarge the humanities public. And that caused us to sit down and think about some thoughts that we were having. And he decided to put a stamp on it. So we come up with new programs. We added those programs, for the most part, to our existing programs. And we haven't gotten a lot of new money for them. So we are engaged in a kind of a delicate dance about how many we can fund and what to fund. Generally, Congress, in a budget, will provide the chairman with some funds for his or her initiative. And so we have some funds that Congress has earmarked, and they do pretty carefully check how we spend our money, as earmarked for the chairman. And so we're funding Public Scholar partly out of that. And as I mentioned, Mellon is giving us money for the other program, the NEH Mellon Fellowships program. We'll give a little, Mellon will give a little, and Brett Bobley will look at digital humanities budget and probably provide a little. But the reason we're going for a 3-year program is because we want to make sure that it's viable, and we'd like to make sure we have funds in future years to cover it. And that's unclear at the moment. So living in the bureaucracy makes you conscious of a lot of different kinds of waves. We don't know who will be chairman this time next year. We don't even know if we'll have a chairman this time next year. We don't know if the common good will go on or not. So these are great initiatives. I think the next chairman will probably be persuaded to support them. But that next chairman will also have other ideas. So that's why I say, are we out front or are we following behind, or what are we doing? Well, we're kind of following the chairman in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, we're following him. And he has this great idea, this great vision. And I will have to say I buy into it, that we should reaching the public more. His idea is enlarge the humanities public, enlarge the number of people that we can reach with some kind of understanding, be it public programs, be it fellowships to write books, be it whatever.
I get one more question, and then, oh no, actually, let me open it up. Provost Gross, please go ahead. I'll work in my question later. It's totally fine.
So, this is probably a question for Robert. The NEH budget just doesn't happen.
Right.
So people make decisions, people debate.
So how could universities and just plain folks be more effective at the moment the decisions being made or prior to that on convincing those who end up voting on these budgets that it matters?
As a federal employee, I may not lobby.
Right, that's why I said I think it's Robert.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, there is the National Humanities Alliance, which is headquartered here in Washington, which is a kind of loose conglomeration of lots of agencies as partners. Specifically, in March, about mid-March, has 2 days of lobbying Congress. And it's the Humanities Advocacy Day takes place right here in Washington, where there are a series of panels, discussions about how we all could do a better job of getting the word out and the message out. And then there are a number of meetings that are particularly planned with individual Congress people or liaisons from Congress. So that's certainly one mechanism, and an ongoing mechanism, an annual mechanism by which this institution and those sitting here can be more actively involved, and they invite that kind of participation. I think it's I mean, I'll just reflect on my own experience since becoming the president and director of the National Humanities Center, and I've been there for about 10 months now. The National Humanities Center does its scholarly programs, which is its core, extremely well. And we have about 500 applications annually for about 35 or so fellowships, and they come from all over the world, and we have these wonderful scholars working there. We also, in the past 12 or 15 years, have launched an educational platform. So we do a lot of online instruction, lesson plans, webinars that are typically vetted through our former fellows, so they have a lot of scholarly credibility and therefore are distinct from a lot of the online pedagogy that's out there. And about teachers from 46 states or deal and benefit from for professional certification or what have you, or just personal interest, these educational programs. And I have felt since I've come there that the part of the mission that we haven't done very well is the public engagement mission, and it's sort of flying the flag of the humanities. So, I mean, it gets back to the question that you asked about assessment to some degree. Again, I think the encouragement within the university assessment system increasingly needs to allow room to reward, whether it's under service or scholarship or pedagogy, more outreach into the public, just for the sake of our own survival, and to communicate the message in a more cogent fashion than perhaps it's been communicated in the past, about why the humanities are at the fabric, within the fabric of everyday life, and the profound junctures and transformations that occur in everyday life. So I think those of us who teach and study the humanities, this should be part of our mission.
Further questions?
So even though there aren't many of us here, I'm an undergraduate student here at Georgetown. And also understanding that neither of you work directly at a university, but how from your perspective might you understand or foresee the role of students and aspiring scholars in the redefinition of the humanities and its repurposement in the years to come, whether on their own accord or through the incorporation of the faculties under which they study?
Repeat the question.
So it's a question about how undergraduates can be incorporated into this discipline and take up a role in humanities scholarship in the way that might happen going forward.
Yes, we don't offer grants for undergraduates, but we do offer grants for projects that employ undergraduates. I think the best example I know of is the Scholarly Editions Project, where they employ a number of students, probably on the 20-hour, usually 20-hour a week, to work on a scholarly edition. Collaborative research grants can also employ undergraduates. And those mostly, many of those involve archaeological digs, which are great fun, obviously. If you go down to James Madison's Montpelier, we're supporting a dig down there on the slave quarters, which have recently been discovered. And we have a very excited young archaeologist who's leading that dig. And he brings people in, not only undergraduates from area universities, but also people who are interested in just taking a vacation down to Montpelier and digging. And they have group meetings, they have a house that they can inhabit. So there are some opportunities. You need to find a project to be involved in. And that's the chief avenue for undergraduate involvement.
And I would add to that there is, with just as there's an enhancement in terms of the various publication venues that we're now dealing with, there has been an enhancement in terms of more humanities projects are collaborative than used to be. So the sort of monastic vision and siloed, isolated vision of the scholar working in his or her study, that's still true, but a lot of projects are now interdisciplinary projects. There are projects that are addressing large issues from complicated and a multiplicity of perspectives. And the more room that we can have for funding and for allowing for undergraduate research participation in those collaborative projects, I think the better, just to get undergraduates invested in what is humanities research, which often seems an oxymoron for some undergraduates, that there is indeed research in the humanities. Often from an outside perspective, it's thought of simply as a pedagogical enterprise, when indeed it's not. That kind of involvement, I think, is increasingly crucial.
Just speaking as a professor here at Georgetown, I'll say that digital publication offers a lot of opportunities to make undergraduates not simply apprentices, but actually producers of real scholarly value, whether it's a matter of editing and annotating texts or communicating knowledge. All of a sudden, that's something you can do through digital venues in a way that it would have been very hard to do with the sort of traditional print publication. That's pedagogically challenging to set that up, but I think it's quite valuable, and I hope it's something that can be part of humanities pedagogy more in the future.
So I'd actually like to address and welcome our undergraduates here. I can't pass up the opportunity to say that undergraduate students, graduate students, faculty are so welcome in this library and all libraries, because so much of the root of the primary source research that can be done will occur from the 5th floor with our fabulous resources and rich resources and special collections to the 1st floor with our fabulous digital technology resources, and the kinds of productivity that you can do emanate from the historical, as Dan Shore actually led the discussion with, into the contemporary through digital humanities, digital scholarships, digital productivity. All of these things touch on some of what each of you has said. And none of these things really can work without strong library support. So
Absolutely. Yep.
A shout out to all of us.
No, go ahead, please. No. I'll keep Sarah on tabs here.
Let me speak as an alumni, because I'm not technically an alumni. I'm a student. I went to another different school, but I'm a student currently in my advanced stage in the graduate studies program, lifelong learning. So I consider myself a de facto alumni. I go to a lot of alumni events, and soon I will be an alumni. I would urge you to make it part of your mission to reach out to your alumni. One thing I observe about Georgetown University is, back when I was applying to colleges, this was basically a regional school. It had an alumni base, but it didn't have an alumni base like larger. This university's done a really good job of advancing itself. It's really only recently that it's got the kind of alumni base that can really give the university a lot of resources. It's starting to show in this new campaign that you've been having here. You've got a real resource there. And the thing that I think, because alumni of other institutions, the thing that really seals the deal, that makes people want to give, is talking to faculty, talking to students, engaging, having events where you do that. you just read this stuff or you hear the general. It's those personal contacts, those personal stories that really can make a difference. I think it should be part of the mission of the faculty. You got to do this with your administration. You can't just go out that. But I think it should be part of all of your mission to engage with your alumni base. Just a suggestion. But let me give you one specific thing. Last summer, I was at Nantucket, the whole thing on Nantucket, all universities. So there's one for Georgetown. I went last year, and there was a fellow there who spoke on this reinventing the university. And people really liked that. This was an alumni event. It had, it's on Nantucket, so it's somewhat willing.
It's a good place to fundraise.
I'm kind of alumni based. I really love your university. And they had this one fellow there. He spoke, and everyone really liked that. It was an alumni's house. Barbara Cooper, I think was her name. I would urge you to have 6 or 8 or 10 people at the next one. Faculty people, graduate students. So it isn't just a presentation, but we're standing there drinking and eating hors d'oeuvres, and we can interact with you, find out what you're doing. I think that would really help you. Georgetown is on a platform where it can really increase its endowment right now, and it's started. Both sides are kind of feeling that out, figuring that out. This is somewhat new for you, newer than it is for other universities who have been doing this for decades and decades. Take advantage of it. Make it part of your mission. I say if you're not doing this, you're not doing the whole job.
Terrific. I think that's a wonderful suggestion. I don't know if either of you want to speak to that. That seems specific to Georgetown. But, I know Provost Gertz had to leave for another event, but I'm sure he would appreciate your comment very much.
You send 10 people out there and you places in the States. One of them can stay at my house.
I'll get your address after the event. Sarah, I saw your hand as well.
Yeah, a question about humanities advocacy and the ethical questions and the arguments that we make, that one makes for the humanities when in practical ways it's budget. It's partly a question that comes from being here at Georgetown. In other words, we often see that, what is the value of the humanities compared to something more practical that will help students get jobs and be productive members of the workforce. There's also this other angle, which is there are so many students at Georgetown and people who are in general not homelessness in the environment. That's the pressure. In other words, I see students saying, that is such a luxury to devote my time to joy, to pleasure, to beauty, to music when there are homeless people in Washington. So that kind of argument, I don't see that articulated very clearly. It's something we wrestle with ourselves very often. So for our panelists, especially who are thinking about these things, I'd just like to hear what your responses might be to that angle on this question. Why the humanities? Why support it? Why nurture it in a world that is in crisis in so many ways that we can readily identify that our students can as well and do. So that's my question.
So I think the humanities are crucial in terms of the conversation about social justice. I mean, I think they're intimately linked. And what you're raising is, I think, I'll go back to my comment to the person at the back of the room. That's students dealing with the issues of homelessness in Washington, D.C. I mean, it's not just an issue of addressing a single homeless person. I mean, it's a larger issue. It's a policy issue. It has all kinds of parts to it. And therefore, it's an interdisciplinary project, which is also a humanities project, which is also a research project, which is also an outreach project. And to my mind, increasingly, universities ought to be involved with their communities and working to better those communities by bringing the expertise that resides here. And those are humanities moments for me.
I will say ditto to that. From day to day, I live in the humanities world, and that's pretty much all I think about. I'm constantly conscious of the capaciousness of the humanities. the expansion of the humanities to include more and more subjects, more and more viewpoints, and hopefully more and more people. I think about that a great deal in connection with the public work that the agency does. And our concentration now on bringing in more people and institutions that have never before applied to NEH or had NEH grants. We're aiming to spread everything around. It's harder to do that when you have a different kind of institution than we're in. We can tailor our programs pretty much as we please and the chairman desires to. I do think that we are on the cusp of spreading out more, and that can only be good.
Yeah, actually, let me add to that as well. And there's, particularly since it's been on my mind this week, April 4th is the anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King. And there's what I call a humanities moment that I often talk about when I'm giving speeches. On that day, that evening, Robert Kennedy was running for president, and he landed in Indianapolis, where he was supposed to be giving a talk, and he was supposed to be giving a talk on what was a ghetto in Indianapolis. And of course, we didn't have the means of communication that we have now, rapid communication that we have now. So the audience to which he would be speaking was not yet aware that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And he was told after he got off the plane that it was a dangerous setting, that cities were starting to be burned throughout the country with large African-American populations on that day. And he insisted on going anyway. And he got up on the platform, everybody was joyful and clapping, and then he broke the news to the crowd. And in breaking the news to the crowd and talking to them, he quoted from Aeschylus. And it was a quote that talked about pain and through the grace of God coming to understand pain, etc. And he spoke about, the need for not to respond solely with anger, but with understanding, and all the best sort of humanities rhetoric that one could imagine. And Indianapolis was the only city in the country with a major African-American population that did not burn that night. So this is how the power of what we do and the importance of what we do translated through this historical event. And I think those kinds of moments are things that we need to communicate more in our classrooms and to the public and in our scholarship.
Can I just add one little perspective? I think, and Sarah, I know you'd agree that the desire to do justice and to seek justice is central to the humanities at present. I think that's an important thing, and I think it was captured nicely in Robert's comment about the problems we face not being merely technical problems, not being problems of calculation. I think it's also important to defend a vision of the humanities that is capacious and isn't constrained by the most immediate concerns or narrow or temporal concerns of justice, that seeks understanding and justice in the widest possible way that includes things like aesthetic pleasure, like all kinds of human flourishing. In fact, keep open the possibilities of human flourishing would be one of the things that the humanities is capable of doing. Yeah, we need to communicate that. Yes.
Hi. I'm Janet Mann. I'm the Vadis Provost for Research, and I'll get your message to Bob. But so what I wanted to ask, I'm actually a biologist and psychologist, so I'm not in humanities. But I do think it is really important for there to be a stronger collaboration between humanities scholars and both social and the natural sciences. But there are quite a few challenges in broadening that scope, and Dane mentioned some with the HIV collaborative grant. I'd be interested in what other ideas you have for encouraging that, because the standards and practices of the fields are very different, and what scholars get rewarded for, there aren't common venues for publication that are rewarded by those disciplines. There are many, many challenges building those collaborations. What would you suggest?
it's hard because, as I said, we don't give a lot of collaborative grants. And the ones that we have given are sometimes the results of serendipity, where people just happen to get together. Although a grant we gave to Stanford University last year, it was for a conference that they had previously brought together scholars from various fields at Stanford to work on, together with Chinese counterparts, on Chinese laborers who had built the Transcontinental Railroad, if you can believe this. And we funded the conference that brought those workers over to the United States and sent them to tour some of the sites at which their ancestors or the workers had labored. And then they were going to produce a dual language kind of publication eventually. That didn't happen during the grant, but it happened afterwards. They had consciously put this together as a collaborative grant. If you have somebody in the institution who has that kind of a vision, who putting together something and wants to add an interdisciplinary aspect to it, then I say you go out and find a person, because it doesn't have to be people at the same institution working on the collaborative grant. You just need one institutional home. So I'm almost of the opinion that it's hard to do this, but when you do it, it's going to make a big splash. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone out and talked, most recently out at George Mason, to interdisciplinary meetings where people are trying to get together to do just that. I use the AIDS HIV example because it is so interdisciplinary. But it could be two scholars in history and literature. It could be two scholars in folklore and literature. It could be anything like that. It doesn't have to be sciences and social sciences and humanities all at the same time. You can write a quite coherent proposal in two disciplines, not several. I still use that example because I still think it's one of the most interesting examples that shows how sciences and humanities can work together. The Chinese railroad worker application was a good one too. That one was fine. We have also had a project where the team collected together from various campuses of the University of Texas is working on African American and Latinos separate approaches to civil rights. And those people are mostly in the same discipline, so it's not interdisciplinary, but they are working together on that project. Happy to show you the application if you ever care to see it.
Yeah, when I was dean at University of Utah, we started the first graduate program in environmental humanities in the country. And this is a burgeoning field, which may speak to the kind of disciplinary combination. And our thinking in doing this was to say, most environmental studies programs historically have been in biology or public policy. And we can talk about technology, but we also have to talk about the implementation of technology. And without consideration for the history, the place, the cultural and sociological ramifications of the place and the people where technology is going to be implemented, you often lose something, and the ethical considerations as well. So the idea around environmental humanities was to embrace, not eschew, but to embrace the public policy dimension and to embrace the science, particularly the biological dimension, but to do it through humanities lens and to have those various disciplines in conversation with one another as you're addressing issues of climate change or the rhetoric between ranchers and environmentalists and why they can't talk to one another, water rights issues, particularly in the West, which is absolutely crucial these days. There's important grand challenges that we're all facing today. And so I think a lot of interdisciplinary programs emerge in response to grand challenges. And scholars sort of get together and say, how can we solve these things? And the only trajectory toward a solution typically has to be an interdisciplinary trajectory. And I think federal agencies that give grants and foundations in particular that give grants are very much invested in funding those kinds of projects these days. And we're all chasing grants.
We have time for one more question, or should we? Okay, one more question.
Actually, this isn't a question. I just wanted to announce for anyone here who's at Georgetown and wants to see sort of how innovative, primarily sort of digitally based humanities projects might be taking shape these days. This coming Wednesday, April 13th, from 5 to 7 p.m. in Copley Formal Lounge, we're having a gallery show of projects that our graduating master's students have done. These are all capstone projects. They're not written sort of traditional scholarly theses, right? But there's scholarship involved and critical work involved. There's also production of sort of objects of knowledge that are very unique to each student and to their interests. So, and there will be wine and food. So yes, so Wednesday the 13th from 5 to 7 in Copley Formal Lounge. And it's open to the Georgetown.
Great.
English.
I think we should probably.
Can I just make
Yes.
a similar announcement?
Yeah, of course.
Also on Wednesday, if you just want to tour your way around the Bioethics Research Showcase is in the Gilman Student Center, and it's all undergraduate projects done in various different formats, addressing a range of bioethical issues. So there will be food as well. So you can just trace your way around from one research conference to another, but that's celebrating undergraduate research also.
Terrific, terrific. Okay, our time is up. I hope you'll join me in thanking our wonderful speakers.